Hey everyone, Graham here from therecordingrevolution.com, and I got a special interview today with our guest, Mr. Joe Carrell, professional mixing engineer out of Nashville. Joe, thanks for being on the site with us today.
You're welcome.
Joe is a guy that I got to know through Kevin Ward, who's another great friend, and he runs mixcoach.com. And so we mutually met online, I suppose, over the phone years back, and I actually interviewed Joe on the site. I looked it up earlier today. It was the end of 2010, which is crazy. So that I'm going to link to that here in the show. So if you're on the site, you can link to that interview and listen to our conversation a few years back about mixing, all sorts of cool stuff. We talked about tape saturation, we talked about workflow, templates, all kind of cool stuff. But I wanted to bring Joe on today for two reasons. One, he is a professional and he knows what he's talking about. The guy has worked with everybody from the Newsboys to Michael W. Smith to Thousand Foot Crutch to Cutlass, Bebo Norman, one of my personal favorites, Sanctus Real, and even in the jazz world, he's worked with Cuba Gooding, the legendary Cuba Gooding. So super widespread experience, and he works primarily as a mixer. So he does this day in and day out. But what's cool about Joe is he has a primarily in-the-box workflow. So he's mixing in Pro Tools, in a DAW, and that's what most of us in the home studio world, most of you watching this right now, that's your world as well, as opposed to a mixing console or all sorts of summing gear and hardware. And so I'm excited for Joe to share some of his perspective on how to mix, since he has a very similar workflow to the rest of us, and it would hopefully encourage you and motivate you guys and get you focused on making better music now in your studio. So Joe, thanks again, man, for talking with us today. I appreciate it, bro.
Oh man, glad to do it. Looking forward to it.
So just so everyone gets a little bit of a background for you real quick, and then we'll jump right into the nitty-gritty, can you just sort of tell us, how did you get into doing what you do? Like how are you now a full-time mixer?
That's a good question. I've been a musician practically my whole life. Guitar, drums. Drums was kind of my thing, playing in clubs. I played in church. I played with some traveling, groups. Anyway, back in 1999, I think it was. I mean, prior to that, I studied, read up. I subscribed to Mix and EQ and all that kind of stuff back in the day. Had my own little Mackie, ADAT, that kind of a deal. Room in the back bedroom of my house. But in 1999, I got a chance to go professional as an assistant for Bobby Bradley, who is Owen Bradley's nephew. Anybody that knows anything about country music knows that Owen Bradley and Chet Atkins started the whole deal. Owen built the Kwanzaa hut right over here and was the president of Decca, and Chet Atkins was RCA, as I recall. And anyway, so that never looked back. I worked for Bobby for about probably 2-3 years, and ended up going, independent. When you're in the scene, you meet so many people, and that networking is what leads to future clientele, and it just never. I was very blessed. Is a really good way to sum it up.
Yeah.
I'd met people that believed in me and gave me a shot, and 15 years later, so here I am.
That's awesome. So would you say that in a given week, you're pretty much just mixing for clients? Is that primarily what you're doing?
Yeah, I track, a couple days a month. Like just yesterday, I went out and did a 10 and a 2 tracking session with, the drummer, bass, piano, that kind of thing. But in large part, it's mixing. I would say that's 85% of my daily, weekly, monthly, whatever schedule. Yeah.
And so are these clients that obviously you're not tracking? Most of these clients, they send you stuff, you open it up, and you mix through their album, their singles, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. There's obviously, since I do some tracking, I do some of my own mixing on stuff I track. But yes, other people as well. I never. Sometimes, it comes from all over town. Sometimes even all over the country. Different studios in different states.
No, absolutely. That's awesome. So, real quick, give us a rundown of kind of what your core setup is. Like, what are you mixing on? What's your go-to tool, so we have an idea of like what your typical setup is?
Yeah. Okay. I treat in the box mixing just as I would out of the box mixing on an analog console. First and foremost, that's the way I learn. That's the way I'm comfortable. But I still think it's the method. I still think that's the best workflow. I know you can do some things differently, but I think working that way with aux returns and sends, and having, instead of putting a reverb plug in on 47 different tracks, you have your handful of reverbs down here that you're sending just like you would on a console. But so I like the sound of tape. So like the first plug-in on basically any channel strip for me is a saturation type plug-in. There's many of them out there. I mean, I can tell you the one I use, but I don't, guys, don't get hung up on what I use or what Chris Lord Alge uses or Bob Clearmountain uses. There's lots of different tools. So I use a tape type saturation plug-in, and then I use a console emulation plug-in right underneath that. Waves and Stephen Slate both make that kind of a thing. And to me, they work. They make a difference. It may not be a dramatic, but so just raw. When I import my template, which everything is zeroed out, by the way, there's no predetermined EQ curves or compression settings, but just raw. When I import my session data, all my plugins are bypassed, but those, and so it already sounds better, and it already sounds more like it's passing through a good system right away, as opposed to just raw audio. Does that, what I mean?
So yeah, so people are clear. You pull up a session, and on every track, before you do any actually EQ or compressing, you've got a tape saturation plugin and a console emulation plugin, track by track by track, that you're just passing audio through.
Exactly. The exception would be stuff where, like, let's say background vocals. If there's 8 to 10 passes of background vocals, I'll just do that on the stereo bus that I have set up, or aux that I have set up to some certain things like strings, brass, because that can get crazy. I mean, and that's not the way we did it back in the tape days anyway.
Yeah.
You summed all that stuff down because track count was limited.
Yeah. So
you didn't have tape compression on all 16 passes. You had 16 passes summed down to a stereo track of faders, and that's what ended up going to tape and passing through the console anyway. So but yeah, you got it right.
Awesome. Okay. So you like to treat it like a console. You pass audio through it. Now, I guess, how does that affect your workflow? So your setup makes a lot of sense, but when you approach a mix in a DAW, how do you typically like to work through a mix mentally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I start mixing right away. When I'm listening down to the rough mix that's in place, or sometimes it's all been passing through an analog console at the last stage anyway, so everything's just a zero. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm listening to the song, dropping markers if there's not markers, where the verses and the choruses and the bridges and turns, all that kind of stuff is, just so I can bounce around quickly once I get there. But I'm figuring the song out. That's first and foremost. What we do is clearly, it should be a result of what we hear and the direction that we're taking the song, not just our process for the benefit of our process. It needs to be for the benefit of the music. But as part of my template, I've got aux sends that already pop up, and they're already named. There's a drum. Like on my drums, there's a room send. There's a plate send. There's a parallel compression send. There's a distortion send, and they're already there. I don't have to set and think, okay, I want to send the snare drum to parallel compression. Let me create a send. If I'm doing that, I'm thinking too much about the technical side.
Yeah.
I need to focus on the music, the work of art that I'm trying to make. The more time I spend in, black and white, right and wrong, creating aux sends, creating routing and stuff like that, is time spent not doing really what I'm being hired, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To do. That's why I work from a template. On all the different, tracks, whether it be piano, B3, brass, whatever, the aux sends that, the type of reverbs, the type of delays and everything that I would potentially use on those devices is already there. If I don't use it, fine. But if it is, boom, it's right there. I don't even think about it. And as part of my template, I bring in a very large virtual effects rack. And I have a pretty nice collection of outboard effects too that I can patch in, and they actually show up as plugins. But like today, the stuff I'm working on is 100% in the box. So I'll bring in a couple different types of plates, a couple different types of there's two different halls, a room, a couple different band delays, a couple different delays for vocals, that type of thing, a chorusing,
Hmm.
and they're already there, and they have my favorite types of patches. We're creatures of habit,
Yeah.
once we find a particular plate we love, we tend to go to it a lot. And so
Yep.
that, when I said everything is zeroed out, my effects rack is the exception. I'm not saying I never change it, but it's already there. If I want to send the snare drum to a little bit of a room sound, it's already there. You know what I mean? I'm staying in the artistic zone rather than the technical zone as much as I can.
No, absolutely. It saves time, and you do this with a template. So, for those of you listening in, pretty much every DAW that I've worked in, you create a session. You figure out the patches or the presets you like Joe's sharing your favorites, name the tracks the way you want, and you can basically save that session as a blank session with no audio in it or whatever. And depending on how your DAW works, you can either import information from that session to a mix that you're working on, or you can open tracks up into that session. But either way, it's already saved somewhere digitally. So it's like walking into your studio and having your rack there already set to kind of your favorite settings, and they're
Exactly.
labeled, and it's just a patch bay that's already to something that's already created. So you just plug and listen and go, oh, dial in how much you want. So yeah, a template way to work is what Joe's describing is a time saver, and it keeps you in the creative zone. So it's a great idea.
Exactly. It's just like a console. We had aux knobs. If we wanted to send the
Right.
vocal to, this one particular reverb, we just reached up and did it. We didn't have to create the knob. It's already there. And that's, you can do that same thing in the box. You can do it. There's no reason not to. In fact, if you're not taking advantage of that system, I strongly recommend it, because it'll put you the time, if you have however many hours you're budgeted or whatever for a song, you're spending that time on what's important, as opposed to, redoing the same setup process. Spending a half an hour just
Yeah.
doing that kind of stuff. And I've seen people that work that way, and they try to remember. Okay, now bus 33, 34. Let's see. That's
Right.
my. No, I mean, just name it. Long delay, vocal delay,
Right.
or whatever, and yeah, it keeps you where you need to be.
It's like your virtual masking tape. Just pull out a Sharpie, write it, and put it on the console. That's
Exactly. Yeah.
awesome reverb for the drums, and like it's always the same. Yeah, absolutely. Saving
And
time.
I will say that in my template, I have more guitar tracks, more keyboard tracks, more whatever than I will ever use, and that way, um, there's all when I do import my session data, virtually every track is accounted for right from the beginning. Even though everything is zeroed out, I kind of already have some of my favorite EQs for that type of an instrument, or compressors and whatever. I'm not locked into them. I can
Yeah.
change them. I have multiple signal paths I can resort to if something isn't working. But like we're creatures of habit, and we know what we like, and so why not have that there from the beginning? If it doesn't work, change it. But if it is working, you're you're
Oh
making
yeah.
progress quickly.
And I would almost say that makes a lot of sense to keeping maybe your style or your musical signature as a mixer, and that's what used to happen. Is you got a mix. It sounded like a Joe Carroll mix because it went through your console with your gear and a lot of the same things of habit that you like. It's not because of the gear, but you tend to reach for the same things. So some of those things make their way onto lots of different records, even though they're different
Exactly.
music. So otherwise, like you said, you're recreating everything from scratch. And maybe, like, would you say there is a time and place for these young guys and gals to discover their
Oh
plugins
yeah.
and discover what patches they like, but maybe you're saying once you found some things that worked well in a mix, maybe save them and put them in your template.
Exactly. Yeah. Have a couple reverbs that just smoke on vocals. A couple, on a bass guitar. You love an 1176. You love an LA2A, depending on the style of the music. And if the 1176 isn't working, go to the LA2A and keep moving on.
I love it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's the only tube out there, but you'll
Yeah.
develop your favorites from things that you know that work. Don't you don't leave every path the same all the time, because sometimes it isn't the best thing. But and then I'm sure a lot of your audience is limited. They've not been in this a long time. Maybe they're using the stock digi stuff or whatever comes with digital performer or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that, man. That's where you got to learn. Yeah, the compressor that's built in may not have the color and character of a real LA2A or whatever, but it's still a compressor. That's how you learn. There's no reason. Shoot, I still use that stuff on records all the time. The built-in stuff.
Well, and that leads me to a huge issue that I know we were talking about a bit beforehand. What you aptly called the addiction to plugins,
Yeah.
that a lot of everybody suffers from. It's not just young home studio owners. I mean, all the big boys. We all love our toys. But can you just describe and address maybe what this addiction to plugins is and why it's a problem, and maybe a better way to look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm My take on being a successful mixer is you're hired as an artist, not a technical. I mean, yes, we technically have to be able to pull off what we do, but what separates, why are they going to come to Nashville and hire me or Chuck Ainley in the room next to me or whatever, versus some of the guys in your audience that's from wherever or what. It's not just some of the guys in your audience. I promise you could get a kick drum to sound every bit as good as I could, or a lead vocal effects chain, that every bit as good as I could. But I spend time to focus on making the song emotionally correct. So the tools, the tools, but you're not addicted to the tools. The tools are just a means to the end. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I've had some assistants and some interns that they just drop cash left and right, to have the newest and latest, greatest and everything. I have a nice collection, but I'm not concerned about having every model of an 1176 or every model of an LA2A from every manufacturer. It's nonsense. Have a couple that work and just use them. Focus your attention on becoming a better artist, because that's what mixing is not, is not just technical. It's very much like playing an instrument. I'm a drummer. You spend your time in the room learning your paradiddles, doing your rudiments,
Yep.
and when you actually sit down to play, that stuff should go away.
Hmm.
It just flow. The time you spend on the technical goes away, and it just naturally happens. That's what you try to get to the point, in mixing as well. You've spent your time. You know what the different release and attack times do to a drum, to a bass guitar, whatever. Okay, I got it. It's in my toolbox. Now it's done. I'm listening to the song, and I can take my the skills that I've learned and just let them naturally come. And you don't have to have a gazillion tools to do that. In fact, I have basically seen that the guys that, in my opinion, the guys that have that mindset are sometimes the least skilled mixer,
Hmm.
because their mind is in the wrong zone. You know what I'm saying? It sounds great, but it's still just sterile. The balances aren't right. The emotion isn't right. The things don't pop out when they need to, because they're caught up in the sound of the electric guitar as opposed to its interaction with other instruments, its interaction with the song. Where does it need to come out just a little bit to create an emotional impact, whether it's aggression, whether it's sadness, whatever the case is. That's why you make a living in this business. Spend enough time on the technical to be good at it, and then you know march on with the art, because that's
Yeah.
really what separates the men from the boys.
Oh, that's huge. I mean, maybe speak to the home studio owner who's watching right now, who understands what you're saying, that it's not it can't just be a technical thing. We're not just engineers. We're artists. But how does someone know, I guess, when they're good enough, that point where they can say, okay, I know the technical stuff, and now I'm just going to focus on creating art and being reactionary to the song? Like, is there a tipping point that you feel like you know of, where you felt when you're like, okay, I'm moving from thinking in terms of numbers and frequencies and what's the right thing to creating art? Or is there any suggestion you can give to the guys that feel maybe insecure about their skill? And a lot of these people might be better than they think they are, but they still are afraid of not being good enough, whatever good enough means.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of hard to answer, but when for me, I remember when my mixes started, uh, when I felt like they started holding their own against the heavyweights. Sonically. You know what I mean? When I felt like, okay, my guitar tones, my overall balances, my use of effects, just sonically, if I took something out to the car and I had a commercially released product from whoever that was in a similar genre, and mine were kind of there. Now, obviously you have to know that what you're listening to has been professionally mastered on the commercial CD versus yours has. Yours may not be quite as loud, may not have quite as much gloss, that finished polish. But if kind of the overall vibe is there, the balances, the tones, then yeah, start, you're good. You're good at what you do. So start spending more time now dissecting. Listen to like in Nashville, for example, probably the two top guys in town as far as the major label heavyweight country work, Justin Niebank and Chuck Ainley. That's probably names that a lot of your guys know. Sit down and listen to something that Chuck does to Miranda Lambert record or whatever to make it emotional.
Yeah.
Where does her voice? How compressed is it? You know how to use compression. Now listen. Use those skills that your ears have developed. Listen to that lead vocal, and you can think, okay, in this genre of music, they're just beating the thunder out of it because it makes it sound really aggressive.
Yeah.
Think of L.A., Chris Lord-Alge or something like that. He's great. He's great at making something sound really aggressive. And like Justin Niebank with like a Taylor Swift, right? There's more flow. The vocals are punchier, more lively. In that style of music, the emotion, country music, is very emotional music. And words are allowed to get louder. Everything doesn't have to stay like this. You know what I mean? We use enough compression to make it sound great. You pull the tone out of the unit. There's no denying what compression does to the sound of a vocal, but if you're only using compression to rein in your dynamics, you're missing it. That's what your finger can. Set enough compression to where the tonally it's doing some great stuff, bringing up the tails of words, that kind of a thing. But if you don't have your finger on a fader, if it's just parked at a static level, you're probably missing it emotionally. Get it, whatever you have to do to get into the zone of that song. If it's aggressive, if it's sad, if it's, I do a lot of work in Christian music. If it's very worshipful, whatever. Put yourself in that mindset, and you get the technical out of the way, and then start working on the art. What word does it sound? When does it feel like the vocal needs to come up, and when does it sound good when it's when it falls down into the track a little bit. In country music, it's one of the things I love about working in country music. I'm doing more and more of that all the time. Is that we still do fills, steel guitars, electric guitars, pianos, fiddles, whatever, have their little melodic lines that pops out of the track. I love that. That's a lost art in most every other form of music, since Van Halen or whatever. Yeah. And that has a huge impact emotionally on the music. Those little melodic lines. Get them out there where they need to be, where they feel great. Where they're hitting you in the right way. I hope I probably got chasing rabbits, but hopefully that answered your question.
That's huge. It's pretty timely for people that are watching this in real time. But just recently, Sound on Sound magazine had a great article interviewing Andy Wallace, who mixed Nirvana and Linkin Park and a lot of rock records. And most of what he talks about is when they're talking about how do you get your mixes to be so hard hitting and so everything, and he said it's all volume rides. It's all just,
Yes.
and then he spends most of his time talking about I sit on the console, I just ride things to make things pop out where they need to pop out, and that creates the energy and the impact and the interest and engagement. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because we've been talking about that on the site lately, and it's through for guys listening in, it would just be your simple automation in your DAW, being able to find the automation lane of the volume and riding a virtual fader or penciling it in and just listening and bringing up things or down things. Any part of the song, it could be a drum fill, it could be a bass note, it could be especially vocal rides are huge, making sure certain words, tails of words are heard. But it's a huge thing that I think is lost because we're so stuck in plug-in settings that we forget one of the
Yes.
most powerful things we have is some volume automation, right?
Yes, yes. I promise you that if you have, two of your listeners are at the same skill level, and one of them can't get past, which one of his 14 versions of 1176s sound best on the vocal, versus the one guy that only has one version of it, puts it on and gets busy making it feel right. That guy's going to get the gig.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that's got one measly little, maybe even the stock Digi 1176 is going to be the guy whose mix is better and gets the gig, versus the guy that spends an hour sweating over which, gosh, do I use my UAD? Do I use my waves? Do I use the blue stripe? Do I use the black? That kind of a thing.
Yep.
That's nonsense. It just really is. You study it, learn the differences between a blue stripe and a revision D or whatever. But once you know the difference and it's in your tool bag, move on.
Move on.
Move on. Let it go, man. And
love.
spend. If some of you guys that do have extra disposable income and you're putting all your money in plugins, put it in acoustics of your room. If you're just wanting to make your home environment better or your mix is better, put it somewhere else. Make your room sound great. And to where it translates to the outside world, and your bass isn't all jacked up or whatever,
But it's not as exciting as buying another plug-in, though, is it?
I know, but it's going to get them the gig.
Yep.
It's going to get them the gig. That's really ultimately what they want. Probably they want to try to be doing this for for a living, or making their own music sound better when they go to perform live dates. People listen to their CD and think, man, it holds its own, against commercial release stuff, as opposed to, wow, that came out of a bedroom.
Yep, absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do. And that's huge. I appreciate you sharing that. That's great. I want to kind of close out. This is awesome. With maybe if you could share with us maybe one of your favorite or most helpful mixing hacks or tricks. I mean, I call them hacks. Anything that is a simple thing to implement that always tends to get you a good result when you do X, Y, or Z across the board as like a rule of thumb. Is there anything like that you work with or you do that you find as part of your bag of tricks that helps you when you're working day in, day out?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Low volume mixing. And I can give you 3 reasons. Number one, save your ears. These are a limited resource. They only have so many usable hours a day and so many days in our life that they're going to stand up. So save yourself. Take care of them things. When you're mowing the yard, put them earplugs in. You go to a concert, put earplugs. Whatever you have to do. Number 2, the louder you turn your speakers, if you are in an environment that has acoustical flaws, and most every room does, you excite and exaggerate those problems. And number 3, the focus that you have to have when the volume is low, you have to be really focused. It's not, kick drum's not pounding you in the chest by volume. You have to, when you're at a low volume and it still has punch, it's when you turn it up, it's gonna get you. And so the focus aspect of it, but also you hear blends differently and better. When you mix a vocal, for example, when you're doing your final vocal automations, and you do those rides at a low level, when you turn them up, they're going to be right. Yeah, you know what I mean. Everything is going to be where it belongs. So that's a biggie for me. I listen to my larger speakers first, and I'm dialing in my sounds because those are full range monitors that have, great frequency response from top to bottom. But and I'm not trying to create gear lust, but NS10s, are a real standard. But any cheap speaker, a boombox, whatever your guys have, um, um, make that your low volume. Switch over to that. You're not hearing all the great exaggerated highs, all the great exaggerated lows that feel good, sound good. The mid range is more exposed, and you're making great EQ decisions on vocals and ride decisions. I spend, the biggest part of every mix is spent for me at a pretty low volume, pretty low volume.
That's huge. That's humongous. It's such an easy thing to do. Turn
Yes.
the output down, and it has so many humongous mix changing results.
Yeah, exactly. The argument that I hear the other way, Graham, is that it doesn't feel good. When it's loud, it's exciting and that kind of stuff. But if you're locked away and in the right zone, artistically, while you're doing this, you should be able to feel the same way even at low volumes. And if your song is not feeling that way to low volume, then it's probably not this. It's probably the mix that's not right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can hear aggression at a low volume. You can hear energy at a low volume. Maybe you need to spend a little more time on all your automation or something.
Yeah, no, you're right. Dude, that's awesome. Joe, great stuff today, man. I really appreciate you sharing, taking time out of your work schedule to do this. If guys have any questions about this in particular, is there a great place to email you or to just touch base with you if they wanted to just pick your brain, or anywhere you feel comfortable being accessible that I can
Yeah,
put here?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My email address is Mojo. You know what? Look me up on Facebook. That'd be good. That'd probably be a good one. I use Facebook pretty
Okay.
good. Joe Carrell. My spelling is strange. You'll probably put it on the screen, but
Yeah.
JoeCarrell, and you'll see this mug staring right at you, and that's how you know you got the right guy. And I post a lot of stuff, studio stuff and stuff from time to time, so they may enjoy it. But my email address, yeah, I don't mind giving that out. It's MojoeMix@yahoo.com. Mojo Mix.
Mojo Mix. Perfect. Yeah, man. Just in case guys have any questions about some of the stuff you shared, and I appreciate you, making yourself available. A lot of people who follow this site or this YouTube channel, they have the same passion that you have to make great music, and a lot of them are super talented. I hear their mixes. I've worked with many of them, and what they don't have is a community. They don't have guys they can go get mentored by. So even just
Right.
hearing this interview and sort of picking your brain from afar, I think can help them get a lot farther. Maybe just even have the confidence to realize, hey, I'm doing better than I think I am. And so I really appreciate you availing yourself today in the interview. Some great stuff. And I know I'm always reinforced when I hear other people saying the same things that have helped me and that I've learned over the years, and that you're still using them today. So thanks a lot, Joe. I really appreciate the time,
You're
man.
very welcome, Graham. Take care.
Take
Thanks
care,
so
man.
much.